tendency to show off. So let me lean into my tendency. I've read hundreds, if not thousands of the books. Several of them were autobiographies. When I decided to read Pacino's autobiography, I was scrolling up and down on the Amazon browser. I'd almost bought the hardback format of the book. But then one of those rare events took place. My better sense took over, and I decided to buy the audiobook. Not the hard copy, but the audiobook. Sonny Boy, written and read by Al Pacino. Pacino has been one of my favorite actors since the Godfather trilogy. I had a bootlegged DVD which had all three films together. I watched all three hundreds of times. Pacino's restrained performance fascinated me. I wanted to know more about him. I went to Crossword. Crossword is a chain of bookstore in India. Only book which came closer to the format of biography or life story was Al Pacino, the authorized biography by Lawrence Grobel. In fact, I have this book with me. This book has traveled with me all the way from Pune to London. So this is that book. I carry this book everywhere, wherever I move. Not travel, but wherever I move. So this is that book. So Grobel has not really written a linear biography, but in fact, it is a collection of long interviews that he did with Pacino over the period of 2 decades. If you have watched any of the interviews of Pacino, you would have noticed Pacino is extremely self-conscious and frankly not very articulate. Still, in the book, Grobel asked him some good questions and Pacino gave him some insightful answers. So in the book, at one point, as a part of their question and answer repartee, Grobel asked him, Al, are you happy? To which Pacino responded, there is nothing called happiness. There is only concentration. This answer has stayed with me for various reasons, but this answer has lots of meanings, and any person who has had any kind of creative pursuits in life would understand how important this statement is. There is nothing called happiness. Only thing that is true is concentration. So with great deal of suspicion and anticipation, I started reading. Correction. I started listening to Sonny Boy, written and read by Al Pacino. As I started listening, I was mesmerized. I know this voice very well. I wanted to listen him. I wanted him to keep talking. Most challenging part of the biographies of any famous personality is the early years, the years of childhood. That part could be interesting for them, but that part may not be interesting to the readers. So that part always gets boring. In fact, I suggest that some of the autobiographies actually should just drop those chapters, because those chapters are drudgery. Not in this case. For some reason, Pacino surprised me. Yeah, I was prepared to listen to this at 1.5 times the speed. But then Pacino genuinely surprised me. Not only his childhood chapters are very well written, but they are read by Pacino with so much earnestness that I found myself lost in that world. I never imagined Pacino to be such a good writer, to be honest. But I guess after years or maybe decades of reading high quality scripts, something has rubbed off. Pacino writes movingly about his mother, grandfather, broken family, his friends, his childhood milieu in New York, the abject poverty, absolute abject poverty, the buddies that he hung out with. And it provides you a necessary perspective about the formative years. There is a scene. I know that's his life, but I'm just going to call it a scene, because Pacino's expressive voice actually has kind of made it a life drama. So, there is that scene where he describes his visit to a restaurant with his mother and estranged father when he was 5 years old after his first performance. Watch out for that scene. Very well written, very well performed or read by Al Pacino. Then there is one more scene which stayed with me, is where little Al was over at his father's to spend a night, and he missed his mother, and which is when his father drove him back to his mother's home in the middle of night. Very, very, very simple scene, but again, like Pacino described it so well that it stayed with me. I'm not sure if those scenes would hit the mark with just the written words. That is, without Pacino's voice, I don't know if these scenes would leave this sort of impression on any of the readers. It is instructive to mention Pacino was 82 years old when he recorded this book. In Pacino's gruff voice, it feels like grandpa is telling one story after another. The reading has a typical inflection of Pacino. It was noticeable, for instance, when he mentions the movie author. This is how he reads it, by the way. Yeah, in the book. But then obviously that is done by Pacino, so it just sounds great. With Pacino's unhurried pace, it feels like grandpa is sitting in a pub in front of you, drinking, maybe smoking too, and sharing one anecdote after another. There was a moment in my listening that I was so immersed in the stories that Pacino was telling that I felt like I was inhaling Pacino's secondhand smoke. So there is a podcast by Conan O'Brien where Pacino did one interview basically to promote the book, and which is when he shared this that he was faced with this choice whether to read the book in monotone or use a dramatic voice. And I'm so glad that he made this choice. I would have felt shortchanged if I had read Pacino's monotone. After all, he's Al fucking Pacino. Just to give you an idea, runtime of the English version. This is how Pacino has, or this slow Pacino has been in his reading. So the runtime of the English version is 12 hours and 28 minutes. And the runtime of the French version of the book, which is read obviously by some French dude, is 9 hours and few minutes. Godfather 1 and 2, Serpico, Dog Day Afternoon, Heat, Scarface, the fans of these movies will not be disappointed. The mention of these movies doesn't come just as it is, it comes with lots of stories. Stories before the release, stories during the shoot, stories after the release. Some of the stories, as a fan, I knew, but lots of stories I didn't know. So it actually makes a very good read. Pacino spends considerable time on the duds and the flop movies also. So there were directors who disliked Pacino, like William Friedkin, who also gets a mention. And Pacino's tone describing his experience is confessional. At this stage, I would highly recommend you a YouTube video where William Friedkin kind of let it rip when he was asked about Pacino.
He felt as he had lost the
I don't give a flying fuck into a rolling donut about what Al Pacino thinks. Is that an answer to your question, Greg?
Yeah, it's the straightest answer I could.
I could be sitting here for an hour and try and explain it, but that's a fact.
Exactly.
You know?
Of course.
I cared a lot, for example, about what Tommy Lee Jones thought, because this guy was a brilliant, professional, prepared actor. And he would think about his character more than the director, more than me. He would come to the set with absolutely brilliant ideas. And I don't feel the same about Pacino.
Pacino, unlike Friedkin, is hypersensitive, very introvert. So he blames himself for all these downfalls and questionable choices. The latter part of the book talks about his philosophy towards life, then insolvency, and then movie choices made purely out of commercial compulsions. His foray into TV commercials to support his costly lifestyle. The book ends with many existential questions, and where he talks about death. While listening his very last chapter, perversely, I pictured Amitabh Bachchan's dying scene in Agnipath, which in itself was kind of great coincidence because it was heavily influenced by Scarface. I expected at some point he would talk about his voice. I think his voice lost its quality, and because of that, in later years, his acting appears hammy. So that put serious restriction on his acting. I don't know what his own view is, but then I would have asked this question if I was interviewing Pacino, and or I would have, as an editor, I would have asked Pacino to address that, because as a fan, I was really keen to understand why, like what went wrong with his voice. Was it smoking, or it's just age, or he just didn't take good care of his voice? I don't know. I was curious. I wanted to know. I should also state he does not talk about his hair care regime. I don't know how many octogenarians can boast of head full of hair like him. Before wrapping up, I'll come back to where we started. This is probably the best audiobook that I have ever listened. And this is probably the best advertisement for audiobooks in general. In the audio format, I recommend this book wholeheartedly, whether you are a fan of Pacino or not. Along with this, I would mention one more book, which is by Will Smith. So that book also I read in audiobook format, where obviously the book is read by Will Smith himself. I think the title of the book is just Will. Very well read book. In fact, chapter ends with music, and not just any music, like a proper hip hop music. Very good book. I would highly recommend. Only downside is that book was written before his Oscar.
Oh, wow!
Now let me share a couple of Pacino stories that I know, but Pacino has not included them in the book, possibly out of humility or just modesty. First is when Pacino was working with Christopher Nolan on the movie Insomnia. Nolan, standing next to the camera and staring at the monitor, asked Pacino to do one of the scenes again. He said, "Can you also show spark of anger at the end of the dialogue? Just a spark, nothing more, nothing less." Pacino responded, "I'll do the take again if you like, but I've already done it." And then he added, "You may not have seen it, but then the camera has caught it." That night, Nolan checked the dailies and found that Pacino was right. That addition was there all along. So Pacino's first take was far more nuanced than whatever Nolan was trying to suggest. And that's the cut which remained in the final cut. This story I sourced from Desert Island Disc. So this is a BBC show where Nolan appeared, and on the show, Nolan shared this story about Pacino. The second story is from one of my favorite writers, Eric Roth. So Eric Roth shared this story on one of the podcasts. And so the story goes like this. So Eric Roth, I don't know if you know Eric Roth, but Eric Roth is the one who wrote Forrest Gump, Killers of the Flower Moon, Dune movies, then Star is Born also is written by him. Quite a prolific writer. I like Eric Roth a lot. So Eric Roth shares the story. So he also wrote a movie called Insider. Very good, very, very good film. It is directed by Michael Mann, and Russell Crowe is also there. So Russell Crowe, Al Pacino, directed by Michael Mann, written by Eric Roth. So the principal photography of the movie was going on. And one night, so shooting was going on, and then one night he got a phone call from Al Pacino. And on the next day, they were going to shoot a big monologue by Al Pacino. Now, Eric Roth is a seasoned writer. He's used to getting such phone calls. Usually, when such phone calls come to him, phone calls usually are requesting him to reduce the number of lines or change the words if there are certain words which actors find difficult, or they are finding it difficult. They kind of ask for an easier word, or they just say that, you know what, can we just reduce the lines? So he was expecting that sort of request from Pacino. So they talked about this and that, and then finally Pacino said that, "Why did you write this?" Why? Yes, why did you write this? Now at this point, Eric Roth asked, "What do you mean?" "I mean, why so many words? I can say all this just with a look." Roth was stunned and impressed in equal parts. He called Michael Mann that night, the director. They changed the scene. They had a quick discussion. They changed the scene, and they shot it both ways, with the monologue and without the monologue. And the final cut has the quote-unquote look by Pacino. It does not have that 2-page monologue by Pacino.
Well, my father left us when I was 5 years old. He was not the most ingenious man I know. Let's get back to Brown and Williamson. If you decide to go on 60 Minutes, I got to know everything about why you were fired.
Why?
They're going to dig up stuff from your past. They're going to throw it at you. I got to know what they're going to throw. You understand?
I drink. A couple occasions more than I should have. I was cited for shoplifting once, but it was a mistake. Pushed Leanne one time, and we were both stressed out because of the pressure. She went to her mother's. I got fired because when I get angry, I have difficulty censoring myself, and I don't like to be pushed around.
So that's Pacino for you. And the book that we talked about is Sonny Boy, written and read by Al Pacino. I would highly recommend this book.